Hi everyone, I want to do a Let's Watch again, but this time it's not gonna be a movie, it's just gonna be this video right here that I stumbled upon on Facebook. I haven't yet watched it yet, but I just thought, this is really interesting because the video says 100% proof God does not exist. And I just think that's interesting, and I wanna react to it as he's bringing forth whatever arguments he has. I thought that'd be interesting, and it'd be interesting to to just react to that without being prepared, and to see if he actually has some good arguments there, because he's making a very lofty claim. It's a lot of clickbait basically here, because it's just 100% proof God does not exist. It sounds sensational, so I want to see if it holds up, and if he's able to astound me, if he knows something that no one else knows, or I don't know. This is the guy, by the way, Morgue. He has this whole undead death metal Satanist thing going on there, which, by the way, raises the question: well, if God does not exist, wouldn't the devil also not exist? Then why does he have that whole Satanist vibe going on then there? So, but let's start.
I'm going to give you 100% proof that God does not exist. We're going to lay this to rest once and for all. Now, is this even possible? Can you prove that God doesn't exist? A lot of people think it's not possible. Even many atheists think that it's impossible to prove that God doesn't exist, though they believe that it's highly unlikely that he does. So, is it possible? Yeah, it is. The truth is, it's actually pretty easy to prove that the God of the Bible doesn't exist.
Whoa. His video title was not "The God of the Bible does not exist." His video title was "God does not exist." But already he's narrowing it down.
The problem is that most people aren't smart enough to understand the proof.
Oh, if you disagree with him, then it's not because he doesn't have enough evidence or anything. It's because you're not smart enough.
Not only am I going to give you 100% proof right now the God of the Bible does not exist, but by the end of this video, I'm going to show you that something does exist that's stranger than you could have possibly imagined.
That something does exist that's stranger than you could possibly imagine. Wink, wink. So, most people would argue that, if God doesn't exist, then the devil can't exist either, and and vice versa. But the way it comes across here is that he basically really is a Satanist. At least that's what he's implying, right? Or at least in his opinion, he's probably not worshipping Satan, but he's worshipping something that he obviously really believes in, and it's obviously not God, whatever force he's worshipping, which, in my opinion, and maybe in the opinion of a lot of Christians, might be something dark, at least. At least that's the way it comes across. He's dressed all dark with dark symbolism, even satanic symbolism. So he's definitely worshipping something, and it's probably something dark. At least you get a dark vibe from that guy, right? So he really is kind of implying, well, God does not exist, but whatever dark stuff he's worshipping, that does exist. So that's interesting. So he's obviously not really an atheist. He just, he believes in something and he's worshipping something. It's just not God. So really interesting to see a Satanist who, because most Satanists are atheists, but he obviously isn't an atheist, yet still he argues that God does not exist. Very interesting.
So, are you smart enough to understand?
He did it again. He again said, he again is implying, well, if you don't understand what I'm saying, or if you don't agree with what I'm saying, then you're not smart enough. Very obvious psychological tactic here.
Dan, let's begin. I have faith in you. The idea of the God of the Bible is an attack on rational thinking.
And I thought his video right here would be an attack on the God of the Bible. Well, actually, I didn't, because it's just that God does not exist. Yet, obviously, he's just referring to the God of the Bible.
Comes to proving that God does not exist, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, do you know what a proof is? I mean, how could someone know if I proved that God doesn't exist?
I would think he would, if you prove something, then you can back it up with, with empirical science.
If they don't know what a proof is in the first place. You see, most people, when they say prove it to me, don't actually mean prove it. What they mean is convince me or show me empirical evidence. Now, this is completely different from a rational proof. People are convinced of things that aren't true all the time.
Oh, so basically he's saying that he won't be providing empirical evidence?
I mean, look at all the people that are convinced that the Earth is flat. Holy fucking shit. So,
again, he's implying, well, if you disagree with me, then you're just too stupid and probably believe the Earth is flat. He's not saying that directly, but that's kind of what he's implying. Otherwise, why would have that? Why would mention any of that at all? Because so far, nothing of what he said had anything to do with the actual argument. So he's just setting it up in a way that he can imply, well, if you disagree with him, you're just too stupid and probably believe the Earth is flat.
The first thing we need to know is that a rational proof is not the same thing as convincing someone or providing empirical evidence. A rational proof is more powerful than either of these. Someone can be convinced of something that isn't true at all, and empirical evidence never results in certain truth, but only in probability.
So he's actually attacking empirical evidence there, so I'm guessing he doesn't have any empirical evidence then.
A deductive, rational proof, when its premises are true, and it's used correctly, of course, results in 100% certainty. So let's look at a few examples to see the difference. Now, induction based on empirical evidence goes like this. Let's say that I observe 100 white swans. Then, because of my repeated observations, I conclude that all swans are white. Well, is my conclusion 100% certain? No, it only has a probability of being true. At any time, a black swan may come along and obliterate my conclusion.
So, again, he's implying that empirical evidence cannot disprove the existence of God. Yet the title of this video is 100% proof God does not exist. So, okay, admittedly, he didn't say empirical proof, but that's kind of what people assume that he means. So maybe he should have specified it and be more specific, because he's obviously not referring to empirical proof at all.
Even though it had empirical evidence supporting it. In fact, this actually happened.
In fact, he's actually attacking empirical science, basically.
Used to think, based on empirical evidence, that all swans were white, until black swans were discovered in Australia in 1697. So, in contrast, now let's look at an example of a rational deductive proof. Premise 1, all humans are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a human. Conclusion, therefore Socrates is mortal. Now, if it's true that all humans are mortal, and if it's true that Socrates is a human, then the conclusion that Socrates is mortal must be true. It's impossible for it to be false. It's 100% certain. Of course, for the conclusion to be true, the premises must also be true. So empirical evidence can only ever mean that something might be true, a probability of being true. It can never guarantee the truth of a conclusion. no matter what, whereas a rational proof, if used correctly of course, can deliver 100% guaranteed truth. This is critical to remember as we prove that God does not exist. Now, it's not about convincing someone, and it's not about providing empirical evidence. Both.
Yes, obviously it's not about providing empirical evidence. But I would argue his video is actually about convincing people, because why else would he use those kinds of tactics where he's implying over and over again that if you disagree with him, then you're just stupid. And of course you don't want to be stupid, do you? You want to be smart. Yes, this is such a obvious psychological tactic that he uses over and over again, and we're like almost 5 minutes in now, and that's all he talked about. Basically, he didn't talk about the actual issue yet at all. All he did was to establish that if you disagree with him, you're just too stupid. But if you agree with him, then you're smart, and you want to be smart, right? But it's not about influencing people, no.
That these are flawed. It's about delivering a guaranteed conclusion, and this is done through reason. So how do we prove that God does not exist? Well, first we have to identify what God are we talking about. Do we mean Zeus, Yahweh, Ra? Which one?
Well, I thought you would mean God in general, because the video title just says God. You know, it doesn't say Zeus does not exist. It doesn't say Jehovah does not exist. It doesn't say Jesus does not exist. It just says God in general does not exist. Yet apparently that's not what the video is about at all.
We can't prove something doesn't exist if we don't know what we're referring to. Well, here we're specifically talking about the God of the Bible. Now this...
Well, if you're talking specifically about the God of the Bible, maybe you should have titled your video, Jehovah does not exist.
God isn't just some abstract cosmic force. He has a personality and very specific attributes as laid out in the Bible. According to Orthodox Christianity, this God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving.
Notice how he just, is established that as a given without giving any source for it. Yeah, he's not, and I don't think. Well, we'll see if he actually does it in the future. But I don't think he's about to, give examples for that from the Bible. He just takes it for granted that Jehovah is claiming to be all powerful, all knowing, and all loving. Is he though? All loving? I don't. Well, since he's not giving any examples, we just have to take his word for it, I guess.
To prove that this God doesn't exist, all we have to do is prove that he is not one or more of these attributes. And this is...
But you haven't established that that's actually what he's claiming. It's just, you're not giving any source. It's just you claiming that he's claiming that.
Easily done. All we have to do is point out that God allows people to go to hell. According to...
And how would that disprove God's existence? Oh, he's trying to say that, well, if God allows people to go to hell, then he's not a loving God. This is a very flawed argument. It's kind of like, it's actually exactly like the black swan argument, or the white swan argument he was giving it as an example. He was giving that as an example, yet he makes the same mistake. How would God allowing people to go to hell disprove his existence? That doesn't make any sense. And I get that he's saying, well, if he allows people to go to hell, then he's not a loving God, so he can't exist. Doesn't make any sense either, because I guess you could, even though he has not given any source, I guess you could argue that the God of the Bible portrays himself as a loving God, at least, is he a loving God, or well, it's not even himself, because that's also a mistake a lot of people make. It's not, if you take, the Bible as a whole is not the direct word of God, and it doesn't claim to be. And it's most of the time it's just written by humans, and who are at best inspired by God. That's what Christians and Jews claim. They don't claim that the Bible is the direct, perfect, unchangeable word of God, like the Quran claims, which is a very lofty claim, and also therefore a very difficult claim to uphold. But the Bible just claims that it was written by humans with human flaws, and it completely admits that it has human flaws, therefore, and at best that at times some of the people, not even all, just some of the people who have written the Bible might have been inspired by God. Okay, so most of the time it's not even God who speaks in the Bible. It's just humans who might have been inspired by God.
Orthodox Christianity, hell is the worst fate imaginable.
But yes, you could argue that in the Bible, generally speaking, God is portrayed as loving. So then how can he be a loving God if he allows people to hell? And that's difficult for people to understand. That's especially because, in the Bible, especially in the Bible, Jehovah is usually referred to as Father, and that's something interesting. So how can that? Because that's something a lot of feminists have difficulty understanding as well. They argue, well, how can a father be loving if he has like strict rules, and if he punishes his children? That's not a loving father. And of course I'm not advocating physical punishment at all, and it doesn't even have to refer to physical punishment. The arguments I had with feminists that don't let me see my daughter, they're in the exact same vein. They just the mother of the child wants me to have contact with my child, right? But it's certain feminists that don't, and they're not even related to anyone, but it's those feminists that don't, that basically disagree with the mother, disagree with me, and disagree with the child, because even my daughter wants to see me. But those feminists, they prevent her from seeing me, even though she made clear she wants to see me. And I won't get into it too specifically, because this is not what this is about. But the reason they're so against me having contact with my daughter, I mean, I never did anything wrong. I never harmed anyone. I never punched anyone or did anything, but because they're feminists, in their thoughts, it's so entrenched that not only would a father not be a good influence, but fathers generally would be a bad influence on a child. And the reason for that is because historically there have been fathers who might have been a bit harsh, who have strict rules to follow, and so on. And those feminists argue that those rules and especially the punishment, which doesn't even have to be physical punishment, but of course especially if it were physical punishment, but even if it's not physical punishment, then that's really harmful for a child, and therefore we should not, that's what a lot of feminists think, and especially the kinds of feminists that I'm dealing with, because they're a special branch. They're especially fanatic. But I won't tell you exactly who they are, because that's not the point. The point is there are some especially fanatical feminists who do the best they can to prevent children from having contact to their fathers, simply because they believe in general that any father would be a bad influence on his child, because historically there have been fathers who have punished their children if they did something morally wrong, for example. And that would actually be wrong. That punishing children under any circumstance, even if they did something morally wrong, would be wrong. That's the kind of thinking those extreme feminists that I sometimes have to deal with have. And that's the exact same thinking that this guy has here as well. That's what his entire argument is based on, because he can't imagine that a father who is punishing his child for doing something morally wrong could be a loving father. I disagree. I think that is actually the definition of a loving father, because if you really are a loving father, then of course you don't want to raise children that do evil things, right? You want to have children that are ideally well behaved and do good things and don't harm people. You don't want your children to harm others, do you? So, but how do you teach your children that harming others is wrong? Of course, you could just tell the child, well, don't do that. But what if the child doesn't listen? What if the child doesn't understand? So I'm against physical punishment. Like I said, I never use physical punishment. I would never use physical punishment. But I can understand that punishment in general, not necessarily physical punishment, or maybe even in some cases physical punishment, can be important for your children to learn if they did something wrong, if they maybe harmed others. Suppose your child is very misbehaved and constantly harms others. Of course you tell the child, hey, don't do that. But what if the child doesn't listen? It just doesn't listen and it keeps continuing to harm others. But you gotta do something, and you gotta think of some form of punishment that is fitting and that lets the child realize that he did something wrong, right? And that doesn't mean that you don't love your child. It means it means you do love your child, because if you wouldn't care about the child, then you wouldn't care how it turns out. You wouldn't care how many people it might harm, But precisely because you do care about the child, you don't want the child to commit too many wrongdoings, right?
Eternity of torture.
And that's what he doesn't understand at all. I'm guessing maybe he never had a father.
Sure. So since God allows people to go to hell, this means either he is not all loving, because no being of infinite love would allow.
Because I think if he really had a loving father, he would understand that concept, right? But he's completely oblivious of that concept. It's basically just tough love. But since he's completely oblivious to that concept, I would argue he probably didn't have a father, or at least not a father that employed tough love. Or maybe he had a father that employed tough love, maybe a little too tough. But anyway, he's completely oblivious of that concept. I mean, I didn't have a father either, but I can understand the concept.
Allow souls to be tortured for all eternity. Or he is powerless to stop this from happening, in which case he is not all-powerful, or he doesn't know that they're going to hell, in which case he's not all-knowing. No matter how you crack it, this absolutely
Again, there's another misunderstanding. He seems to think that going to hell is for all eternity. but again, he's not giving any source what he's basing that as. It's obviously it's just his understanding, and it's I wouldn't generalize it like that. And actually, in a lot of cases, especially in Christianity, it's implied that it depends on what it depends on your sin, basically. If you have committed so much sin that you're completely unsavable, then yes, maybe you will go to hell forever. But in normal cases, you wouldn't go to hell forever. You would just go to hell for a little while until you have paid off your sin, and then you would be saved, and you would even be saved from hell. You can see that in a lot of Christian iconography, in a lot of Christian paintings, where the angels would descend into hell and save those who are still savable, and raise them out of hell. Because they have, maybe they have been in hell for some time, and now they have paid off their sins, so they get saved. So that's the idea of hell. But he seems to have the misconception that everyone who goes to hell goes there for all eternity. No, it's kind of like with the tough love concept that he's completely oblivious to. Obviously, it's that the point is not the point of this type of punishment is not it doesn't lie in the punishment itself. It relies on the child realizing that he has done something wrong, and he's regretting it. And then when he's regretting and realizing that he's done something wrong, the punishment ends, and maybe, hopefully, he will realize his mistake and will not repeat it. The whole point is to prevent the child from repeating that mistake.
Obliterates the existence of the Orthodox fundamentalist Christian God. He just simply doesn't exist. He can't exist.
Why? Why? Oh, again, it's circular reasoning. It doesn't make any sense. His only argument was, well, because basically God implies because God employs, well, it's not even God. Basically, his argument goes like that: Jehovah employs tough love, and therefore he can't exist. That doesn't make any sense.
An impossibility. It's a logical contradiction. His properties and actions result in a contradiction. What we're talking about here is a version of what's known as the Epicurean paradox, but we're just getting started. Some fundamentalists
You're just getting started, huh? Well, it's gonna be interesting what your great 100% certain proof is gonna be next.
Believers will say that God.
And by the way, I love atheists. I don't even have anything against Satanists. As you know, I have some friends that are Satanists. I talked with some of them. I even made interviews with some of them. I have nothing against atheists. I have nothing against Satanists. And I'm not trying to convince anyone that God does exist, like he's convincing people, or trying to convince people that God does not exist. I don't care. Believe whatever you want. It's fine with me. I'm just, want to look with you at his arguments and want to see if he does have some valid arguments, because I find it interesting that, he just slaps this sensational title on it and says 100% proof God does not exist. And then it turns out, well, he's not even talking about that at all, because he's not talking about God in general. He just talks about a very specific God, and as it turns out, he doesn't have any empirical proof that he doesn't exist. And in my opinion, he doesn't have any proof. I mean, everything he brought up so far doesn't prove anything. It doesn't make any sense. It just shows that he doesn't understand the concept of tough love. But God
allows people to go to hell because that's their punishment for not believing in him. They say God wants.
Whoa. Again, he's not giving any sources, but generally speaking, the concept. So I can only talk in general terms because he doesn't, precisely because he does not give any sources that he's basing that on. But I'm assuming he's talking about Judaism and Christianity, so I can only speak in general. But you would agree, right, that generally speaking, the concept of hell is what I just gave you. It's people, generally speaking, it's believed that. Or people who do believe in hell, generally speaking, believe that you go to hell for having committed too many sins, for having harmed other people. That's why you go to hell, and you don't necessarily go to hell forever. You go there until you have paid for your sins, and then you get saved. That's the idea and concept of hell, generally speaking, right? Yet his idea and concept of hell seems to be totally different, and his idea of Jehovah seems to be totally different. For him, Jehovah is like just this evil guy. He's like that's how he comes across to me. He's like a little child who maybe experienced a bit too much tough love from his father, or maybe not any love from his father at all, and then he gets angry. He's like, no, fathers are evil. He sounds to me exactly like those feminists that I have to deal with. No, fathers are evil. All fathers are evil. Fathers should not be allowed to have contact with their children because they're all evil, and they punish their children just because they might have beaten up some other school children. Yes. And just because those school children have beaten some other school children, this evil father has punished me. Those school children. Yes, and that's why, he's like a little brat, that gets angry at his father for punishing him for doing something wrong, and that's probably what happened, and that anger at his father or at his parents led him into Satanism or something, because that's actually the case. You have to be honest, that's the case for a lot of Satanists these days. It's not because a lot of Satanists these days are atheists. It's not like they worship Satan because they love Satan so much. They don't necessarily even believe in Satan. They just basically do it because they want to get back at their parents for being too strict with them. So, and that's the vibe I get from that guy as well. And that's why he doesn't understand those things, because he has no concept of what of how a truly good father would act. So I'm assuming he didn't have a good father, so that's why he doesn't understand that concept, and he's just like, no, all punishment is evil. Children should not be punished at all. They should just be allowed to do whatever they want and harm as many other people as they want, and there should be no punishment for that. Because if you punish your children for harming others, then you're not a loving father. Yes.
Wants people to have free will, and that's simply their punishment for choosing not to believe. Now,
No, it's not their punishment. He doesn't, I don't know, either he doesn't get it or he's intentionally misrepresenting it. No, generally speaking, that's not God's punishment for people not believing in him. If people go to hell or something, or if God punishes them in any way, it's generally not for not believing in him. It's because they committed sins and maybe harmed other humans. It's not necessarily that they even harmed God in any way. They obviously probably wouldn't even be able to do that. They just harmed others. other children, so to say. Suppose, so the concept is like, God is like this father, but he obviously has a lot of children. All humans are basically his children. So, you can't just have one of your children harm a lot of his brothers, right? You can't just allow that, especially if you are a loving father. You can't have your child harm his brothers, right?
How insane is this? This is beyond crazy for so many reasons. First of all,
though admittedly, that's what the God of the Quran is like. That's how Allah is described. Allah does send people to hell for all eternity for not believing in Allah. But we're not talking about Allah. We're not talking about... He made it very clear. He's not talking about Islam. He's not talking about Allah. He is talking about the Jewish Christian God, and he's talking about Jehovah.
Kind of a maniac of a God gives someone free will, but then allows them to be tortured for eternity if they don't choose what God wants them to choose.
So actually he just made a good point against Islam, but he's not even realizing that at all.
How is that free will? I mean, really think about it. Would you do that? If you're a sane person, of course you wouldn't. So why would a being...
Hey, this is getting too long, and it doesn't look like he's coming up with, the kind of sensational proof that the video title was promising. So I'll stop here. If you think he might still have some great arguments, some great proof, well, then go and watch the video yourself. But it looks to me like he's not gonna have this sensational proof anytime soon. So I'll stop here because otherwise it's getting too long.